Hello, I'm Dr. Kirsten Milliken, and are you in for a treat today? I interview my friend Lindy Grigel, an integrative medical professional here in Maine, and we are going to talk about everything from epigenetics to imponderable influences on our health, the ways that she treats the whole person and the person across their whole lifespan for ADHD. I hope you enjoy the show.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to be part of your program. I'm Lindy Grigel from Fall River Health Center, and I have had my integrative medical practice almost 15 years now, and my background is very steeped in medical education. My first degree was in occupational therapy, then I went on to do a master's with physician assistant and a specialty in biostatistics and epidemiology. And
those are big words.
They are?
Statistics and epidemiology.
Yeah.
What does it even mean, epidemiology?
Yeah, it means the study of disease in communities and over time.
Okay, I don't take it for granted that everybody knows what all of these things are.
Pull that out. It's completely
It's
fine.
all okay. She's smart. That's what we're trying to get at. Lindsey knows what she's talking about.
And I practiced medicine for many, many years, and I became interested in integrative medicine when I became a mom, and I had a little one with ear infections. So I went back and studied homeopathic medicine and did postgraduate studies and began to integrate my knowledge. So I worked very traditional emergency room for a while, family practice, and then I began a consultative integrative medicine practice.
Wow. So that's interesting because I got really interested in working with integrative medical providers when my child, my oldest, Harris, started having ear infections.
Wow.
And it was like the second time in a row in a couple weeks. And I knew that antibiotics were not the way to go and started working with our chiropractors. So,
Interesting.
yeah. And my youngest one, Oliver, had chiropractic from the time he was like 2 days old. And he might have had one ear infection in his life, but yep, never had any of those kinds of issues.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So didn't go the full-fledged route of getting my medical degree, but took advantage of those who did.
Always, you know who the people are to work with. That's the important part about it.
Yeah.
And so I work with children and adults from all walks of life, of all ages. I have known, people sort of know me as the pediatric person because I do a lot of work with children.
Oh, really? We can't tell.
Yeah, and I think some of that has to do with my background in occupational therapy.
Yeah.
Because I have a really deep understanding of reflex integration and motor patterns and typical development. So when people come in here, I'm able to really do a big scan across all the physical parts of their development, their family history, from early childhood, even at birth, up to the point that they come in to see me.
Wow.
Yeah, so because of my varied medical degrees, it's almost like I have an eagle eye view standing back and looking at a comprehensive intake of everybody.
Yep. So you're the opposite of our usual allopathic medical people who are looking at whatever their specialty is.
Yes.
And everything is related to that. And you're really looking at the whole person and what could it be?
Exactly.
What else could it be?
So oftentimes, like I'm a team lead for many people that come in here. They come in with stacks of specialty reports.
Yeah.
And for me, I have to sort in there and weed out what's pathology, what's typical development, particularly with children with their neuropsych evaluations, what's our complicated education system that asks children to sit for prolonged periods of time.
Yes.
And a lot about nutrition and what happens when children have 5 minutes of quiet time in the cafeteria, 5 minutes to eat their food, and 5 minutes to get ready for recess.
Yes.
And they're not eating during the day.
Oh my God. You and I are going to talk more about that in a minute. So I want to introduce people to your space, if you don't mind, for a second. So we've showed that, yes, she clearly works with kids. And I love these little farmhouses. And Lindy invited me to actually interview her sitting on the rocking horse. So, and super cool. Oh God. I have a thing for all kinds of cool stuff. That just like beg to be touched and looked at, and
well, many of the things in here are actually gifts from people that they've brought me.
Neat.
So it's
and we're actually going to talk about this mandala too that you've got up here in a little bit. So just all kinds of cool stuff, and of course the coolest thing in the office right there, Lindy. So I'm actually going to take a seat, and my best friend DeShawn is going to be here today. Handling the camera. So there you go. We're gonna sit next to the
barn.
The barn with all the animals.
I could tell you stories about this farm, but it would need to be edited.
I don't want to know where the animals have been.
Yeah, no. After you leave, I'll tell you the story about the barn. It's actually pretty sort of funny.
So you work, one of the reasons that you and I met a while ago at a networking group that we used to go to and made a connection around some of the things, the people that we were working with. Tell me about, you mentioned just briefly working with families who have attention issues or who have had neuropsych evaluations, which often accompany kids who have attention issues. What's the work that you're doing with adults and kids who have ADHD?
Well, can we separate them in a way into
You
two
can
categories?
separate them into as many categories as you want.
So as you know, adults are just grown up children, and so whatever the story that they had as a child, they have as an adult, but usually it's magnified and they've developed compensatory mechanisms to be able to adapt to their environment. And so when adults come in, oftentimes it's more difficult for them to isolate what it is that is the problem because over time they've learned to compensate. And so many of the adults that come in have comorbid anxiety and depression that also needs to be looked at and treated and is the primary underlying challenge that they had anxiety and couldn't function perhaps in a school or a work environment, or did they become anxious secondary to that? And so for adults, if we stay focused on them for just a minute, when anybody comes to see me, the initial appointment is 2 hours, even for like teeny little babies, they come in. And with adults, I will often trace back very significant story of family history because I'm learning more and more how genetics and epigenetics and the stresses that they have been exposed to during their life play a very, very important part.
So DeShawn and I were just at a conference last night at USM, University of Southern Maine. Peg Dawson was presenting.
Oh, interesting.
And she was talking too about epigenetics and how the Harvard Children's Program is looking at how toxic stress, environmental stress is affecting.
And recently at the University of Pennsylvania, they just started a new big research project down there studying the epigenetics and how oxidative stresses trigger off genes. And so for me, this is where my medical background comes in, that I'm really able to assess what are the stresses in people's lives. So that includes more of the obvious, their family unit, their work environment, but also are they eating, are they sleeping? And as you may be aware, I believe it was in 2015, the CDC said that sleep disturbances were a major health problem. And so as a culture, we don't really understand the depth of what sleep debt does to us. And it has a very, very profound impact. And so when adults come in, it's a very inclusive history and physical exam, a review of lab work potentially, reports from specialists. And then I ask them, what are their goals of treatment with me? Because it's really important for me to not look at somebody and say, hey, I think you should, and the big shoulds. And so for me, treatment plan is always based on what the person is coming to me for. And then I identify the stressors in their life. I work with nutrition. I do a lot of sleep counseling. I will prescribe some supplements, although I try to not do a lot because I believe that those cause more stress for people in having to take them and financially, and the guilt meter that comes up if you forget to take them. And then most people that come are interested in a homeopathic prescription, and so that's part of that whole intake. And so with little kids, again, it's a 2-hour appointment. Depending on the age, I typically don't have them stay with me for the whole time, because if they've come to me, that there's a problem or something that's challenging in their life, and it's really important for the parents to be able to tell the story with full transparency and to not try to code it to be nice. And so I go through the same thing. It's birth history, family history, and I ask the parents, moms or dads, what were the first red flags that came to you? Because parents know everything. And the difficulty with 15-minute medicine is the doctors don't have time to ask that question. What do you think is going on? And then more recently, I've become involved with a project which is called the TENDR Project. It's TENDR, which stands for Toxic Environmental Neurodevelopmental Risks. And so this was a very big study that took place across the United States with scientists and researchers or environmental specialists, and they identified certain toxins that they know are risks for neurodevelopment.
Yep.
So I've been doing a fair amount of education and I'm starting to do more public advocacy.
So are there certain ones that they're looking at?
Absolutely. What they did, I mean, frankly, there's probably hundreds of them, but this study identified a few of them. And they basically, it was July 1st of last July, a year ago in July, the New York Times published a call for action. And they basically said, we really need to understand these, we need to be aware of them because we know these are causing neurodevelopmental problems for children.
Oh, wow.
So I do a lot of education. So I'm really lucky that people come to me even during pregnancy and labor and delivery, and I'm able to talk to parents about things that are potential hormone disruptors, the phthalates that are in anything that has fragrances and soaps. And I'm starting to talk to more medical providers that are doing physical exams and will child check and saying, okay, we're already asking about smoke detectors and seat belts and helmets. It doesn't take any more time to ask a few questions about toxic environmental risks.
So you're really starting welcome to the world.
Yes, hello.
Prenatal.
Yes, I do. And the more prenatal I can go, the more I feel like I can really help the child. But even like very little things can be helpful. I had a little boy who came in here. He's about, I think, 3.5 or 4 now. And he was incredibly fatigued. His parents had to take him in a stroller to go to preschool, and he barely could make it through a day. He was disruptive on the playground, and things were not going well for this little guy. And he came in, he wasn't sleeping well, he wasn't eating well. And so I'm not radical about nutrition, but I identify like, what's a food that a child likes? What can we scaffold out of there? And so the kid loves bacon, it's great, nitrate free. And so he came back in for a follow-up, and he put his arms like this, and he
Getting
said,
some protein in them.
I'm Bacon Boy. And I'm like, all right, what is Bacon
that's
Boy?
Funny.
He says, yeah, I don't fight on the playground anymore, and I'm walking to preschool.
The power of protein in the morning.
And fat.
Holy cow. And fat. And good fat. Isn't that funny? My older son also is a very picky eater.
Yeah.
And so the protein that I can get into him is often bacon, which is very funny.
And a lot of children, have very specific vitamin deficiencies. So zinc is a big one that I check with lab work because children, adults too, I should say this is across the board, who have heightened sensitivity to taste and smell often will have zinc deficiencies. And by correcting that, it allows their palate to accept more foods. So oftentimes I will get some basic lab work unless a child's
all right, Harris, if you see this, which you won't, I might start giving him a zinc and see what happens.
Yeah, and it's always a good idea to get baseline levels. And, the way our agriculture produces foods, most foods are magnesium deficient. So the majority of Americans have magnesium deficiencies that can profoundly affect bowel regulation and sleep.
Big sleep.
Yeah.
I know that in the past, melatonin's the big one that everybody says to use for sleep, and I hear so many people saying that doesn't work, and so magnesium is really the thing that...
There are several of them, and the reason that I don't support melatonin unless people are using it for a very short period of time is, again, let's go back. That's all about me. I talk about time capsules, and I invite people into time capsules in my office, and how far will the time capsule go back? So if we go back, for instance, if you have a child who had maybe a lot of ear infections on antibiotics and didn't know about probiotics, their gut microbiome is significantly imbalanced. So a lot of people aren't aware of this, that over 90% of our serotonin, which is our feel good, be happy, emotion resiliency, comes from our gut. And serotonin is a building block for melatonin. So if we don't have the capabilities to produce serotonin, then we can't make melatonin. And if we can't make melatonin, we can't gain restorative sleep. So people take outside melatonin to try to replace it, but it's a hormone.
Right.
And it will never really work the same as rebalancing your system. And people can have side effects. It actually can disrupt sleep, and it actually can cause very significant bad dreams and nightmares in some people. And people are taking across the board way too much. I have kids come in here that their pediatricians have told them to take 3-6 milligrams, and the ideal dose is 0.75 milligrams. So
oh my goodness. So you're hitting a lot of the things that are kind of those challenges for people who have attention issues.
Absolutely.
Are you finding also though that when you're resolving those that a lot of the other challenges that go with ADHD are
Absolutely. People, I look at everything, it's like it's a perfect storm. So if you have high winds, bad rains, and everything's coming at you, you're going to have environmental damage.
Right.
If you have a little sprinkle and the sun is shining, it's still raining.
Right.
But it's not a devastation period.
Right.
So oftentimes, just by helping people identify where there's problems, I do a lot of mindfulness training with people. And I would say in the past maybe 2 to 3 years, I've been prescribing a medical food that is an omega-3 supplement, but it's encapsulated in a phospholipid, which if you think about it, is just like a carrier mechanism that goes directly across your blood-brain barrier. So, the big buzz is take omega-3s, take omega-3s. Well, if you take them, they're good for your gut, and they're good for your skin, and they're good for all kinds of neurodevelopment.
That's where they
but they're not getting to where they need to go. So one of them, there's 2 different ones, but one is Viaran, and it has a 3-to-1 ratio of EPA to DHA, and EPA is about behavioral regulation and impulsivity. So when the children get on a good omega-3 that has a higher concentration of EPA, crosses the blood-brain barrier and goes where it needs to be, their ability to self-regulate oftentimes is markedly improved. And for many kids that come here that are on ADHD medication, the dose can get way lower down so that they get the benefits of it without all the negative side effects of weight loss, decreased appetite, and sleep disturbance.
Amazing. Tell me, what else comes up for you with that population that you end up working with?
You mean across the board, or
just in general, that some of the issues that you see come up over and over again that either people aren't paying attention to, or that just seem to be a consistent.
I think self-esteem is a really huge piece with people who have attention deficits. And for me, is these ICD-10 diagnosis, ADD, ADHD. Like I remember a little boy coming in once, and I asked him if he knew why his mom had brought him in to see me, because I typically will ask that to children, and he said, I'm ADHD. And I said, well, hello, I'm Lindy. It's nice to meet you. And so to me, in our medical community, we try to put a label on something because then we can contain it. And if we can contain it, we think that we can treat it. But to me, ADD, ADHD, and dyslexia, any of these learning disabilities, it's a very complex network of symptoms that present. So everybody's ADD, ADHD, their stories are different. And so as an integrative health provider, it's their story that I'm looking at and not their diagnosis. And that's why sometimes when I'm reviewing neuropsych evaluations, I just see, information, sit closer to the board, blah, 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 be near the teacher.
The top 10, right? Like top 10 strategies.
The top 10 strategies. And I'll always ask the child, okay, you have an IEP, these are implemented. Where in your day is your sweet spot?
Right.
And I always want to know what people's sweet spot is in life, because if you can identify a sweet spot, particularly in a child, I can do some mindfulness with them with containing like red balloons and breath work and school bus meditations. And it's also honoring to that child that somebody actually wants to know where their happy place is during the day, and not focusing on all the difficulties that they're having.
Right.
And I have them focus on that happy spot before they go into school.
Getting schools to recognize that it's not about shoring up all of their weaknesses, it's really about capitalizing on their strengths.
Like I celebrate kids' strengths. Like when they come in, I ask them, well, what do you like to do after school? Where's your happy place?
Right.
And I remember one little boy saying, hey, I thought you were like a medical person. Why aren't you asking me what's wrong with me?
What's wrong, right?
Yeah, and
right.
I said, well, because you already told me what's wrong.
Right.
I want to know what's good with you.
Right, right. What can we build on here?
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So, now I want to talk about your mandala work.
Sure.
You just got back from Iceland.
I did, and I
taught
it up there. I teach this mandala program a lot. I would say I've probably been teaching it for maybe 6 or 7 years now. And so what came to me...
And mandalas, it's an art form, right?
Yeah. Well, they go back to ancient times, and the mandala is derived from an ancient Sanskrit word which simply means a circle. And so it really represents a lot of what I do in here because we're looking at circles of people.
Yeah.
So it can be the circle of the celestial stars, the circles of community, of school and family and medical communities. So it's looking at life in a circular pattern. So the concept of that is not new at all.
Right.
So if you go back into ancient cultures, there's Tibetan mandalas that they would do out of sand and then erase them. If you even think about like the Native American medicine wheel, those are mandalas.
Yeah.
So wherever really we look in time, so I realized I was spending a lot of time trying to do integrative medicine in the model of my Western medical training, which was to take a slice. Here was my slice, nutrition. Here was my slice, sleep. Here was my slice, medication. And trying to focus on one of them. And I realized it was literally impossible to do that and to become successful.
They all just, yeah.
So one day I was out on a run and the word mandala popped into my head. And then the whole word eat, sleep, and learn, a mandala of pediatric health popped into my head. So I went home and I wrote it down because I had to get to work.
Yep.
And a few days later I said, I'm not really sure I know what a mandala is. So I did some work and then I remembered I had a patient who drew mandalas.
Oh.
So I called her and I said, can you help me with this project?
Yeah.
So she designed out and we worked on this mandala and I use it as really a teaching tool to explain to medical providers, parents, educators, your general lay person, how everything is integrated in here. And what you eat affects your sleep, and your sleep affects your ability to become a successful learner. And I don't mean a book learner.
Right.
I mean it's a baby who is able to scan the environment and really take in and process everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it has also, when I work with the mandala, I talk a lot about imponderable influences, the things that we can't see. So the imponderable influences are our oxidative stresses, how our body's using oxygen. It's our exposure to all of this technology, because we can't smell it, we can't taste it, but it's profoundly affecting us.
Right.
So in April, I'm going to go do a presentation in Arizona for the Joint Council of American Homeopaths, which is their big annual meeting, and it's called Screens in Your Genes.
Oh.
And the whole talk is inviting people, once again, to come with me on a time capsule back to Marshall McLuhan, who in the 1960s, basically, when black and white TVs with the rabbit ears came into our home, predicted what was going to happen.
Oh.
And we're here now.
Yep.
And just talk about, the evolution of technology into our lives, positive and negative.
Yep.
But what these imponderable influences do and how homeopathy is a really effective treatment for people who are being profoundly influenced by these imponderable influences.
So can you give me an example?
I can give you an example. I can give you like a lot of examples. And so
one really dramatic good one.
This is a little boy who I saw, and I'll give a really short version because the mom has always given me permission to share the story. But they live out in Yarmouth by the big Wyman plant at the end of Cousins Island. And this little boy, he had some asthma problems when he was younger, and I didn't remember this, that I had treated him with the remedy electricitus. And then time goes on, and he's quite a bit older, and he was falling asleep at school, and the mom was incredibly concerned that he had mono or Lyme.
Right.
And so she called me, and I said it may be good to get some lab work and then bring him in to see me.
Right.
Well, to fast forward the story, she got some notification on her phone about charges to their account, and the little boy was setting his alarm at 3 o'clock in the morning, getting up and going onto the iPad, family iPad, and playing some really inappropriate for his age games. going back to bed at 6:30, and then his mom would come in and wake him up at 7 o'clock for the school day.
Oh.
And it was so atypical of the development and the constitutional state of this child that I began to realize some of this was the imponderable influence that he had been under from a very young age. So I looked at remedies that were in the grouping of what I call imponderable remedies, and there was a proving of computer emanation, which is people's abilities to get sucked in and not be able to pull out and off of the computer, and what it does to the vestibular system and your eyes and how you're processing the world. And so I ended up treating him with that remedy, and he's fine. It was almost like he had a state that he had gone into. Did you ever see the Harry Potter movies?
Yes.
And do you remember the invisibility cloak?
Yes.
I tell people that this imponderable influence is almost like the invisibility cloak in the Harry Potter movies, where they're seeing the world through something. You can't really touch it, you can't feel it, nobody knows that it's there, but it skews the way that you see the world and how the world is impacting you.
Yeah. So there's a lot of talk about screen addiction.
Oh, yes.
These days, and so it almost sounds like that kid was moving in that direction.
Yes.
So are you saying though that there are homeopathic and other kinds of remedies that can address some of? Wow.
Yes. Yeah. And for me, that's one of the beauties of homeopathy. I'm very happy that I have a medical license and that homeopathy is in the scope of my license, because I have otoscopes and stethoscopes and I order labs.
Right.
But on the flip side of it, one of the limitations of Western medicine is we haven't moved forward to identify treatments as the world is changing. Right. So the world today is not the same world that it was 200 years ago, but we don't have anything to help. So we give, SSRIs because people are depressed. We give stimulant medications, but at the end, what Western medicine doesn't identify is this deep imbalance that is caused by environmental factors, and that's where homeopathy can play a really powerful part in people's lives.
Ultimately, getting us to produce the chemicals that are in deficit, or
shifting ourself
rather
and that
than
all goes back to what's your genetic history? Who did you come from? Are there genes for alcohol? Are there genes for cancers? What are the genes that you came with, and what stresses came into your life that may have affected your epigenetics that then turned on some kind of genetic susceptibility to turn on these addiction genes? Does that kind of make sense?
It does.
It's just a whole different way to look at all of this.
I mean, and I have to think it really makes sense in the world of attention issues, because it's one of the most heritable diagnoses in the DSM. And I know I laugh and say in my family, like, it's rampant whether people know that they have it or not. I can see it, and I have for years. So I know where it comes from in some ways, but to want to do better, because they didn't have the awareness or the access to providers like you.
Right. And the interesting thing about homeopathy, there are constantly provings going on, homeopathic provings, and now there's over 4,000 homeopathic remedies. So if you think about ADHD and like our selection of drugs that we can use, maybe would you say there's 10 if I'm being very generous here?
There might be a little bit more, because they're coming out with like new, ones that work for the morning, or ones that work, There's a lot of little nuances, but they're really just a few.
Big classifications, but if you think about it, if somebody comes in, I have a pool of probably 4,000 remedies to treat somebody with, so I have to look at the whole big picture. Who did you come from? Who were your parents? What's your environment? What are you exposed to in your environment?
See, so it's on the website, and also I talk about this, that when you look at the DSM-4 criteria, there's 18,729 combinations of ADHD symptoms that meet the criteria for ADHD, right? And that doesn't take into account that there's usually another problem that goes with it, another learning disability, anxiety,
something
depression.
Something comorbid that's in there.
Right, exactly. And it also doesn't take into account that you can have the symptom a little bit or a lot, right? It's on a spectrum. So so it's always been funny to me that there's like, this set, there are these 4 or 5 different compounds that we, put into different kinds of pills to create maybe a dozen drugs that we can use for 19,000 plus all the rest of the different, ways ADHD shows up, you're really saying we need to take a look at a whole lot.
Right. And I've had people come in here with a diagnosis of ADD, and particularly on a child, if they have an IEP, I never ever want to take a diagnosis away. But they came to me and they were referred to me because they failed every therapeutic intervention with pharmaceuticals. And at the end of the day, they didn't have ADD and they didn't have ADHD.
Yeah.
They had maybe some food sensitivities. They were sleeping 6 hours a night. They had major stresses in their life. And it's like you can get those things calmed down and the perfect storm goes away.
Right.
And you have a happy, well-adjusted child who can function in a school system.
Right.
Yeah.
You also pointed out that a lot of times kids are being identified as having problems when really it's developmentally appropriate. It's just maybe the schools have these expectations, like you said, of kids sitting in chairs, when they are not ready to be sitting, neutral and sitting and focused.
Developmental sequencing and reflex integration probably is not going to change. I mean, it's humans. It's who we are.
Yeah.
But 5-year-olds are not meant to sit in a chair. They're not meant to learn to read and write.
Right.
And like first grade now is probably third grade like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So the expectations are so high.
Higher.
And the demands that are so high that it's no wonder there's so much anxiety among these little children.
Yep. Absolutely. We could go into a whole big rabbit hole with that.
Oh, yeah. We'll stay out of the rabbit hole, right? We'll stay out of the rabbit hole today. That's another conversation, right?
You and I have, I'm sure, there's a lot of conversations that we could have in a lot of different fields. But for the purposes... Chase
me down the bunny hole, right?
For the purposes of this audience that has a short attention span, and I want to wrap things up. What do you think is something, like an important message that you would want to give to adults, parents, maybe even teenagers who are challenged by attention issues or ADHD?
The big message that I would want to tell people is that they don't have to be suffering in the situations that they're in, and that there are people that can help them by looking at different aspects of their life, and it doesn't mean they need to go to a therapist and talk about things, but oftentimes by making very, very small changes with moderation in their life, we can see huge changes in people's ability to function and to have improved executive function and to sleep better and to just be happier, more resilient people with good laughter in their lives, which is at the end of the day what we're looking for.
It's good
can
measure.
You get up in the morning and laugh?
Yes.
When life gets stressful, do you go down your bunny hole or do you laugh? And to me, that's when I tell people everybody deserves to have that sweet spot in their life. Yeah. It's a human right. We're born with it.
Nice. Lindy, if people want to find you, you're here in Falmouth, Maine. How can they find you? Are you online?
Yeah, I'm online. They can Google me. Fall River Health Center.
So it's Fall River, F-A-L, River Health Center.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm here full time and
in beautiful Falmouth, Maine.
With lots of light coming through
the windows. With lots of light coming through the windows. Yeah. So thank you very much, Lindy, for letting us be here this morning.
Thank you for inviting me to be here with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, DeShawn.
So this is the mandala that's the hallmark of my teaching, and it was designed by somebody who has been a patient in my practice, so she really understands the work that I do here. So it's based on the concept where it has 3 triquetra where you can see a central triangle, and the base supports are nutrition and sleep hygiene. So what this means is if you don't have a strong base support, it's nearly impossible to reach the pinnacle up here where the books are, which is about acquisition of knowledge or the ability to learn. So an ability to learn is a newborn infant that's learning to be part of a family unit, and it's a young child in school, it's an adult in the workplace, it's everybody. Right. So that's the basic structure of it, and then the inner circle is integrative medicine, and this outer ring is Western medicine. And then I'm not sure whether you can appreciate it, but these squiggles on the outside is the imponderable influence of screens and digital media.
Yep.
And the earth inside represents the access of world knowledge. So you're welcome to put your finger on this, and wherever you touch, everything is connected. It is impossible to touch your finger anywhere on this mandala and not hook to everything else. So the lesson that's learned with this is the importance of how everything is interconnected. Yeah. So when I teach mandala programs, Sometimes, depending who I'm teaching it to, I teach scientific research behind a lot of this. Sometimes it's parent education, the general public, and then I don't go into so much of the scientific, but the message at the end of any presentation is that this is completely integrated. You can't separate one part out. You can't say, I'm going to eat healthy during the day and get 4.5 hours of sleep and feel like you're going to get to the pinnacle or access the best knowledge that you can.
Right. You need to eat what's going to support your sleep so that you can,
You can learn, and it's all.
And you have to learn to know what's healthy, and yes.
Yeah, and then I do a lot, like sometimes I teach workshops. This was the one I just taught up in Iceland. So it was the third time that I did Mandala Works through this program. So this time I did it all about color and the power of color in people's lives. So it's the color in foods that they're choosing, the colors that they're wearing, and what all the colors do to influence our choices that we make, the colors that are in bedrooms, but also color, blue light. What does blue light do? Blue light, natural light that comes from the sun, right? And the lights that come off of computer screens. So that was a full workshop just on the influence of color in our lives. So that was really fun.
And of course, green.
Good.
Walking in nature.
Absolutely.
If you've enjoyed the show, please like us on Facebook at facebook.com/YourADHDLife. This is Dr. Kirsten Milliken. Until next time, have fun and find ways to play.